So we passed 500 subscribers on YouTube, which is pretty cool. I mean, a channel doesn't really get hot until you get to 1,000. That's when you can do all the, extra monetizing and crazy shit. But obviously, we just do this for the heck of it. We don't. Who cares? But 500 is a nice number. 500 people thought we were worth listening to, so that's
either that or they're crazy, one or the other.
Yeah. So to celebrate 500. I did no research this week. No, what I've got here is normally what I do is, we just dive into random old TV history and I look up, whatever details about the show I can find. But sometimes it's kind of neat to not know. And I thought that's what I would try for this week. We've done this a bit before, but instead of, we usually think of, because we watched X, now we'll watch Y, some kind of connection. But I thought for this week I would just search forgotten TV shows. Just search it on Google, see what happens. And at first I found a list from the 90s, and it was like 90s kid shows. And I was like, no, these aren't even that forgotten. I remember some of these. So then I found a list from the 70s from IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. And the very first show on the list, I just thought, I'll look down the list till I see a show. I don't know what it is. Very first show I'd never heard of before. It's called The Starlost. You ever heard of this show?
No.
So, normally this is where I would give you the rundown about the Starlost, but I started to look it up, but then I was like, well, I don't want to know either. I'd rather just go in and not know. So instead, we're going to watch this show. All I know is it's a space show. This is obviously a decade or so after Star Trek. And I think it only ran for this one season. It's,
What year is it?
I don't know exactly.
Oh.
Late 70s, though, I believe.
Late 70s. Okay, so that would be about a decade after Star Trek.
But again, I could be wrong because I tried to, I stopped looking up stuff pretty much right away. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dive in and watch this show. And then after we watch it, then I'll go look it up and, see what happened. But yeah, it's like it's fun to not know anything because it's a little tough to do. There's not really that much stuff in the world that you don't know anything about. But I've never heard of this ever. But it's famous, I guess, for being not famous. It was top of the list of forgotten 70s shows on this IMDb list. So I don't know what that means.
So was it on major TV, like NBC, ABC?
I mean, I'm assuming so just because that's all there was back then, right? It's not like there was a ton of, like cable access shows or how we have 500 channels nowadays.
Well, we'll just have to find out because maybe there were independent type TV stations that were showing these kind of things, and that's why they're forgotten.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to watch it, I believe these are on YouTube. So we're going to watch episode 1, The Starlost. Episode 1, it's called Voyage of Discovery. Starlost is all one word. But then also, as I was grabbing this, I found they did put out a DVD collection of this show. And there's this little thing called the Starlost series pitch, which is only 7.5 minutes long, and I'm just guessing this must be what they showed to the network to get this show made. So again, we'll watch that after we check out the show. But I'm definitely curious about that because I'm always interested in the behind the scenes anyway of how do shows get made and what was the process. And nowadays, you can find pilot episodes or things, about shows, but I haven't really seen any from this era, from the 70s. Like, what did they show to a network to convince them to make this show? So I guess we can check that out after, too. But yeah, again, we'll get into all that after. So for now, The Starlost, Episode 1, Voyage of Discovery.
Earthship Ark, man's greatest and final achievement, out of control, drifting through deep space over 800 years into the far future. Its passengers, descendants of the last survivors of the dead planet.
Has directed and created Silent Running, and who did many of the special effects for Stanley Kubrick's 2001. We all feel that Starlost promises to be a most exciting and innovative program. A powerful drama of men pioneering the stars and one man's struggle to bring them together, to find a new birthplace for the race. I look forward to seeing you this fall.
So it was pretty cool to see this little pitch video that they made. From the pitch video, I can see why they greenlit this show, because it sounds pretty good when you just get a 7.5 minute, here, hey, I'm the main actor guy. They show like a little bit of what the ship looks like, but it's mainly just literally just them talking. But like, we got Harlan Ellison to write it. I'm this actor guy that you might know. The special effects dude was from 2001, A Space Odyssey. You know, it's like they got a good cast of people, but the sort of dark reveal here, because we were noticing all the way through, like, why is it got this weird green screen look, and like it just, you can see the lines around people and everything looks fake and everything looks bad. And it turns out it's because they pioneered this new technique where they're like, instead of making these big full-size sets, we'll just make little toy sets and we'll use this new green screen type technology. I don't remember what they called it, but so we'll just place the actors against the miniature and it's seamless and no one will ever know. But it's not seamless at all. It looked like shit. The special effects were awful in that show.
They could have taken that trailer or intro or whatever it was and opened the show with that and then cut out a whole lot of the introductory stuff that was in the show itself, because that dragged it down terribly. It was repetitive. It was boring.
Yeah, that's where I hate to be negative, because probably if anyone stumbles across this review on YouTube, which who knows if they will, because obviously it's just a forgotten show. Who knows who remembers this? But if you do, it's probably because you remembered this show and you liked it. So I apologize ahead of time that we didn't like it, but we didn't like it at all. It was so boring.
And it may be that as the show progressed and you didn't have all that introductory BS, maybe subsequent shows were pretty good. But that opening show, they spent too much time in trying to explain what was going on, and as I mentioned while it was playing, the flute music in scenes that should have been where people should have been apprehensive and afraid, and because they didn't know what they were walking into. Here's this happy little flute going on in the background.
Yeah, so much flute music. And then you mentioned too, it's like there's the one kissy romance scene, the one place where a lilting flute would be appropriate, and that's the one scene that didn't have the flute music.
They had this tick, tick, tuck, tuck sound in the background, like...
Yeah, stylistically, it was everything bad about the 70s. It was like the puke green mats and stuff, that weird just browns, just the gross colors that were popular in the 70s. The big 70s mustache, the bad 70s special effects, and the lilting flute music everywhere. Like there's, like how each decade had their own vision of what the future was going to be like. You know, you got the 60s future, and this is the 70s future. This is like Logan's Run times 10. Where then you get to like the 80s future is like Blade Runner. Everything got real dark all of a sudden.
But as you said, they could have done a little intro like they do in Star Trek, the 5-year mission to go where no man or no one has gone before, or whatever. That's all they needed in this, is a little bit of narration, and cut through a whole lot of that stuff where we were trying to figure out what was going on, and then we're like, and I didn't really care.
Yeah, so then I guess the basics, because it is a good concept, it's pretty cool. It's like Earth is destroyed for whatever reason, so they build a big ship, a big ark to send people out, and now it's so many generations later that the people on the ship forgot that there ever was an Earth. They don't know that they're on a ship, but now the ship's going to collide with a star, and this one guy figures out, and that's kind of neat. But like, as you were saying when we were watching it, like it took so long. They just repeated everything over and over. Every scene was so slow, and we're ahead of these characters at every turn. There's no mystery. There's no, like, we already know. We figured it out in 2 minutes.
We know what they're going to say. We know how they're going to react. Too much. And the concept of 100 different layers in this spaceship and presumably each of those layers has different cultures, different humans from different pasts, whatever. I mean, that could be quite exciting. And none of them know that they're on this ship, and none of them know about the others. And that's obviously where the show is going to develop to, but they said that in a little trailer, and that's all we needed to know at the intro, and then they could have jumped right into that Mormonite group.
Yeah, so our hero, his group is basically the Amish or whatever, and yeah, it's just the standard, you cannot go against the elders.
Well, if they had finished, though, what they could have done is give us that little introduction like they gave us in the trailer, and then they could have tied that whole show into a really top-notch half-hour show. And it could have been really, really effective, but to drag it out for an hour and repeat, and the little flute, and Good God, little wonder it's a forgotten show.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is in a way, I guess I'm not surprised that it's not so great because unless something calamitous happens, a show isn't usually completely forgotten if it's good, and this show is very, very much forgotten. But yeah, so I mean, and yeah, the idea that there's like 100 different pods on this ark and each one is a different stage of human civilization, again, a really cool idea, but they did show tune in next week and it's just our Amish hero fighting with a caveman and fighting with a gladiator and it all looks like garbage. Like the special effects were really bad, that's one thing where my generation is so obsessed with Star Wars that Star Wars bothers me. It bothers me that people like it so much because it's so shitty and everyone from my generation loves it. But it does help sometimes when I put myself in the period of what was science fiction like in the 70s. And when you compare Star Wars to that, man, Star Wars is really good. It looks amazing.
Okay, but even if you set Star Wars aside, because it was a movie and big budget, big money, but even when you compare it to the television productions of the time, like I mentioned, Space 1999 is wonderfully done, British television. Well, Star Trek, sure, it has a whole lot of hokey-type backgrounds and that sort of thing, but it's got excellent plots and they move right along, and it's got characters that are really standout characters. Each person has an individual personality that they interact with each other. This one, the three main characters, there's nothing really remarkable about them where you say, oh man, that guy, he was fabulous. Like, he really wasn't that much different, the main guy, than the fiancé.
Yeah, no, there was definitely, like I was saying to you while we were watching it, just something about it that it's like it cues.
And the girl is so sweet. She's just so gentle and just so sweet. Like, she should have a little bit of chutzpah or something that makes her stand out.
Yeah, there's something about the tone of this show that it like sends a message to you to not pay attention.
But in a half hour, if they had done the introduction but with narrative and then really tightened that show right up into 30 minutes, it could have been something pretty good. But to drag it out, it was painful to watch.
Yeah. While I look up the actual details about this show then, and we'll figure out some of the stuff, if you got time, this made me think of, you remember that show, The Orville? It's like a more recent show, and it's like a Star Trek type show, but it's half comedy.
Yes. Yeah.
There's an episode of that show that, I don't know if it's based specifically on the Starlost, but it's the exact same plot. They find a ship full of people that don't realize they're on a ship, and it's really good. So I was thinking we could throw that on while I research Starlost. Okay. So if anybody wants to watch that episode of The Orville, it's season 1, episode 4. It's called If the Stars Should Appear. And yeah, I haven't seen this episode in a while, but I remember liking this one. It was cool. So it's kind of a cool little episode of The Orville. That show is always pretty good, but yeah, it's a pretty cool one. And I just looked up to see if I could find any official acknowledgement that this was like a remake or a retelling of the Starlost plot, but I couldn't find anything acknowledging that, but it clearly is. It's the exact same plot, except just all told in one episode and with some jokes.
Far superior.
Yeah. Obviously it's unfair to compare shows from 40 years apart or whatever, but yeah, obviously the Orville one is a lot better. However, yeah, I just looked up some stuff about the Starlost, and it's pretty interesting. It explains a lot about, and I don't feel so bad now that we didn't like it, because nobody liked it. Even the people who made it didn't like it. So first off, it was a little earlier than I thought. It came out in 1973, so this was before Logan's Run, before Star Wars for sure, only a little bit after Star Trek. But this is a bit of a cell phone, because if anyone hasn't listened to us before, maybe you can tell from our charming accents, but we're Canadian. And it turns out that's one of the huge problems with this show, is the Starlost is a Canadian-produced sci-fi series. That, Canada is a big country, landmass size, but not not a big country population-wise, not a big country money-wise, our movie and TV shows are no good. They're no damn good.
No, that's not. Some of them are very, very good.
But I mean, I don't know if it's still the case, but for a long time, our highest grossing film was the Trailer Park Boys movie. And I love Trailer Park Boys, but that's a good example of like, we're great at that type of thing. Let's just make a nice, simple, low budget thing about people who live in a trailer park and sell weed. We can do that. We can't make big epic sci-fi shows. Because the one from my generation, there was this show called Lex, Lexx, that was a co-production between Canada and Germany. And it sucked. It was better than the Starlost, but I mean, yeah, you're off to a bad start. And why that happened? So yeah, broadcast on CTV in Canada, 1973 for 16 episodes, and then just syndicated on various stations in the US, so it didn't have a specific home, it was just wherever they could squeeze it in. And initially, they intended to co-produce with the BBC, which would no doubt have been a better show. But although, how was Doctor Who doing in the early 70s? What era was that?
Doctor Who started in really earlier than that, 62, I think, were the first black and white Doctor Who's.
So at this point, had we gotten to Tom Baker yet, or was he later?
Tom Baker would have been, I'm going to say the early 70s.
So I mean, still, I guess, technology-wise, not so different, but better. Definitely would have been better. But because the BBC plan fell through, they went with their low-budget second choice, which was Canadian TV. And do you remember I mentioned that name at the start? Created by, and the episode written by, Cordwainer Bird. And I was like, what the hell name is that? It's like in a comedy show when they make up a name. My name is Flimwazzle Zing Zang, like it's just such a dumb name. But it turns out there's a reason for that too. So this series was created by Harlan Ellison, who...
yes, big sci-fi guy.
Yeah, he was somewhat remembered as being a bit of a dick, but, he has written a bunch of famous stuff. He's obviously a well-regarded science fiction writer, and especially at the time. However, the series experienced a number of production difficulties, which I'll get into. Ellison broke with the project before the airing of its first episode, and Ellison on occasion used the pseudonym Cordwainer Bird, and it was to alert members of the public to situations in which he felt a project had been mangled by others. So that was his own personal Alan Smithy. Like, if you see that name, that's his way of telling you, this is not what I intended. Yeah,
this is not top-notch. Okay.
Yeah, and the Starlost has generally received negative reception from historians of science fiction television. So, turns out we're on board with everybody. So the main problem was, as we saw in that little, demo thing that they showed to the networks, is that tech that they came up with that was to it was like a green screen kind of, where they filmed actors and then placed them against a backdrop. And the idea was they could make miniature sets and just place the actors on the miniature, not have to build the whole set. It was called Magic Cam, and it just didn't work. It just did not function the way it was supposed to function. And the failure of the Magic Cam system was a major blow, because the Canadian studio space they'd rented to make this show was too small to build the required sets. So they couldn't even just back out and make the sets big. They just didn't have the room for it. So they had to proceed with this technology that didn't work right. And that's why everything looks so bad.
But I didn't mind the set thing so much. It was the show itself dragged, and the storyline dragged. I mean, I can accept bad sets. I mean, after all, I think Star Trek is one of the first series of Star Trek is the most wonderful thing that ever existed, and I can accept all those fake pizza walls and all that jazz. But you got to have a fast-moving story to go with it, and that to me was the big fault with Starlost.
Yeah, and I don't know the specifics behind that, but I did, because I mean, Harlan Ellison, I guess I don't know a lot of his stuff. I'm kind of familiar with like his short stories, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream or whatever, but I haven't really extensively researched his stuff. But I know stuff like City on the Edge of Forever. It's that Star Trek episode where Spock and Kirk go back in time. And it's kind of like, people think of it as one of the better episodes of Star Trek, but I know Harlan Ellison didn't like it. He's like, this is bullshit, this sucks, they messed up my plot or my story. So apparently with the Starlost, the original script, which is not the shooting script, but the original script of the show, it did win like a Nebula Award or something. And they later, in 1975, a guy wrote a novel based on what the Starlost was supposed to be. So who can say how good those really are? Because I feel like Harlan Ellison, he's definitely a little pretentious. He's still up his own ass. It's probably still not the greatest shit in the world, but by all accounts, it was better than what happened. So not only did they have, it was like this 1-2-3 punch. They ended up having to go with Canada, so they had no money. Their major tech thing that the whole show was based around didn't work, and they had gotten themselves into a corner where they were unable to not use it. And whatever the original vision was, just got messed with. Because there's also this guy, Ben Bova, who's also quite a famous sci-fi guy. He was a science sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? To double check stuff to make sure everything is correct and okay. And he later wrote some stuff specifically about working on Starlost and how nobody listened to him. None of the tech and none of the science is proper on the show. So I don't know specifically what happened there, but that didn't work either. So on no level was this show what anybody had hoped it would be. And so there we go, the Starlost. I mean, I'm glad I looked that stuff up, though, because all that stuff I find, that part is interesting. Just knowing that it's Canadian and that it had this weird tech. Because, again, that didn't make sense. Like, how did the special effects guy from 2001 make this show that looks like crap? And that's why. New tech, didn't work. So, an interesting failure. Or an interesting story behind why it's a failure. Not an interesting show, a terrible show. So, yeah, there we go. There's the story of the Starlost. So.
And they can continue to be lost.
Yep. Because even that idea, I guess the idea, too, is because the ship, the arc that they're on, is like, I think they said it's like 200 miles across. So that was the idea where they're talking about the bridge. We got to get to the bridge.
Yeah.
Is basically that the bridge is on the other end. So to get to the other end, that's what the show would have been year after year, is going through the different pods on the way to the other end of the ship, and each pod is a different society.
And meeting with these societies and trying to get them to understand that ship is doomed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the kind of thing, like, you could fire it up again now. Why not? They remake everything else. Like, try again. It's a good idea. It's a cool concept, but yeah, the 1973 version, yikes, not so good. I think that's that.
That's that.